Welcome back to the Whimsical Workshop. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to do the 4-square quilt. This is a pattern of ours, and it is featuring Allowance from Andover Fabrics. It is a very fun, straightforward quilt block to make. It is a half log cabin or a lopsided log cabin. I'm not sure what the correct name would be for this block, but it is all straight seams. And that being said, you need to do 3 things well to make this quilt. You need to cut accurately, you need to sew 1/4 inch seam accurately, and you need to press well. So I am going to link below our video on how to do a perfect 1/4 inch seam and the tools I use to sew a 1/4 inch seam. But today I want to talk about how the block goes together and give you some pressing tips for it. So first, let's just take a quick peek at the fabrics we're using for this quilt. We have these beautiful prints from Andover Fabrics. It's called Allowance. And the thing about this collection that's so nice for this design is that they're all smaller scale prints. There's no big, standalone focus fabrics. They're all very tiny, very petite, and work very well together. There's the stars and vines. There's the stars with the net. So we've got that in red and navy and powder blue. Then there's this one that's really fun. It's fireworks, which is in blue and in red. And then there's the little ditzy star stripe, and we have that in navy, we have that in red. And then for our background, there was one cream in the collection, and it has this tiny, tiny little powder blue stars tossed through it. So it was perfect for this design. So when I got all of these, I thought I want to keep it simple. I want to make it something people can make, especially if you're looking for a project for Quilts of Valor. It's a great one for that. So these really lean themselves to doing a strip quilt or a log cabin quilt. So let's go on to the quilt. So the pattern is made up of 12 blocks. And behind me here is one row from the quilt, and there are 3 blocks in the row. And then in one block, which is right here, there are 4 quadrants with sashing. So that is how the quilt is made. These are really big blocks. They're 21-inch blocks. So you could just make one block and frame it and have a wall hanging or a table topper. So it's a versatile print in that way as well. The finished quilt, when I'm done, will be 71 by 93, which is perfect for a big throw quilt, especially if you're going to give this to a guy. It's cuddly, it's a nice size. So let's go ahead and walk through how to do the blocks. And I'm going to show you on each step how we press. So we're just going to run through the block. We're going to make it and show you what it looks like. So first step is you take your center block, and if you have ever made a log cabin, the center is always called the chimney, and it's usually red. Well, in this case, I wanted to use 4 different fabrics, one for each quadrant. So the first quadrant is the stars and vines, and you're going to sew your first background strips on, and you're going to press those strips towards the background. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2 is you're going to sew background strips top and bottom. So we're going to go ahead and press that, and that again presses out. So it looks like that. And now we have our center. Next up is to start adding our logs. And remember, this is a lopsided log cabin, so we're only adding a log at this point on one side. And so this is the first log. And you'll notice I added that log onto the long side of the center. That's just how I designed the quilt. There really is no rhyme or reason to this. If you decide to sew the log at the bottom, you certainly could. So please, if you accidentally sew it on a different way, you don't have to rip it. It's good. So we have our first log. So here's our first log, and then we sew our second one on top. So there is round 1 of logs. And you'll notice we're doing blue, white, red. Then we're going to do background again. So we do 1 background. Again, these are all being pressed out towards the center. And when you see when I'm pressing, I flip this up. I use the edge of my iron, and I'm pressing into the seam. That will make it nice and flat. I don't usually go out to the edges because I don't want to stretch it. So we have our center, our first background, our first set of logs, our second logs of background. And now we're on to our last set. So we do these. So in this block, it goes blue, white, red, white, blue. So we go ahead, we press out this log, then we press out our last log on this corner, on this unit. And let's talk a little bit about how color placement is in the project. So if you start in the middle with blue, I alternated blue, red, blue, separated by background strips. So this is the upper left quadrant of the block. Okay, so let's lay these out. So there's upper left. Then we have the upper right quadrant of the block. Never have enough room on your table. Never, never, never. So we have upper left, upper right. Then we have lower left and lower right. So you'll see these two go blue, red, blue. And these two, this one is kind of like could go red or blue, so I considered it a red. And I made that one red, blue, red. So that's the 4 quadrants, and they're being separated by sashing. This is where your 1/4 inch seam allowance is really important, because these finish at 1 inch, which means there's not a lot of wiggle room if you make a mistake with your 1/4 inch seam. So make sure you run a test seam first, sew some scrap fabrics together, measure it to make sure you're coming out pretty accurate with your 1/4 inch seam. So you would sew these two together with a sashing, and you would sew these two together with a sashing. And then in the middle, we have 2 more pieces of sashing and a piece of the stripe stars. And for me, I made all of my stripe stars going vertical throughout the quilt. So in the quilt here, which is, or in the block here, which is this one right here, you'll see I made that the center. And for this part, after you get your quadrants done, when you start sewing the sashing to the blocks, you want to make sure that you press towards sashing from this point out. So when you sew these 3 pieces together with the sashing in the middle, you will press them towards the sashing. When you sew this strip, the center strip together, you will press towards the sashing. And this is the hardest one because everybody wants to press towards that little square, but press towards the sashing. What this will do is if you are always pressing towards the sashing throughout your construction, it will make the seams nest, and it'll make your quilt top lay flatter, and it'll be easier to be more accurate when you sew. So press towards the sashing, press towards the sashing, and then when we sew the whole block together, so there's the whole block, you again are pressing towards the sashing. So sashing, 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 and then sashing this way. That is how you're going to make the 4 square block. You can see why it's called a 4 square block, because it's made up of 4 squares. So once you get all of your blocks sewn together, you're going to sew them into rows with the vertical sashing. So you will make enough sashing to go on each end and in between each block. So you would sew sashing, block, sashing, block, sashing, block, sashing, which is what you see here. Then once you get that done, you will sew the horizontal sashing pieces on top and bottom of each row. Then once the quilt is done, we do have one more border, and that is this guy, and he is your star border. So I will show you what the quilt top looks like when it's all finished, but that is how you make our 4 square block featuring Andover's Allegiance fabrics. So here it is. This is our 4 square quilt all ready to go off to the quilter. I hope you've enjoyed this video on how to make the blocks. They're very easy and fun to make. Just remember, you can make a quilt this size, which is a large size throw, or you could just do 1 block as a wall hanging, or 3 blocks as a runner. So I want to see what you do with this pattern. Let me know in the comments below what you thought. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure you like and subscribe below. You can find the Whimsical Workshop on our website, thewhimsicalworkshop.com, and that has all links to all of our other social media platforms. Thanks for joining us.